they played a set and it was brilliant. Right there, bang. That was it. So I said, I'd love to sign you guys. And I remember Dave Lubeck said, Mr. Werman, all I want is my front tooth back.
I love that story.
He had no front tooth.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Online at bookedonrock.com, where you can find every episode along with links to listening platforms, exclusive videos, blogs, and the latest rock book releases. Legendary record producer Tom Werman is this episode's guest. The book is called Turn It Up, My Time Making Hit Records in the Glory Days of Rock Music, featuring Mötley Crüe, Poison, Twisted Sister, Jeff Beck, Ted Nugent, Cheap Trick, and more. As an A&R man at Epic Records, Werman helped introduce the world to REO Speedwagon, Boston, Ted Nugent, and Cheap Trick. He also discovered Kiss, Rush, and Lynyrd Skynyrd. His record label passed on all of them. As an independent producer, he oversaw landmark albums by Mötley Crüe, Twisted Sister, Lita Ford, Jeff Beck, Poison, and many more. All in all, his record-making resume includes 23 gold or platinum-selling albums and sales of more than 52 million copies. He's here to talk about the bands he discovered and the classic albums he produced, including some inside stories behind the recording process. To hear a playlist of the music Tom Werman produced, head over to the show notes page. Hey, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are right nearby. I'm in Connecticut.
I'm in the Berkshires, in Lenox, famous home of Tanglewood, just down the road. And, basically heaven on earth as far as I'm concerned.
Newton, Massachusetts is actually where you grew up.
That was heaven on earth, too. Newton, Mass. in the 50s, all of America in the 50s was so simple. We weren't the most enlightened culture. There were things wrong, but people were generally pretty cooled out. And as I said in the book, Eisenhower was in the White House, but Democrats didn't care very much. He was still reasonable, and intelligent. And everything was a nickel. Postage stamps were 3 cents. It was a great time. It was a wonderful time. Fabulous schools. They actually taught people how to read and write. And at this point in life, I've learned why they call them the good old days.
Actually, just recently was the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. I mean, how much did that change everything? To me, people have said it too. The 50s, they extended into the early 60s, but once that event came, everything changed.
Everything did change. It was kind of a perfect storm thing, I think, because the baby boomers were now leaving home and had graduated high school, were all, bursting the college seams. And there was the Vietnam War, and there was weed, and there was this avalanche of creative musical entertainment, mostly from England. And the Beatles just turned everything around. They just literally affected everything, everything.
When did you first witness the Beatles? Was it on Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, I think it was maybe in February. I saw them on Ed Sullivan, and then I returned to New York because I was at school at Columbia, and I pretty easily got tickets to see them at Carnegie Hall for $7.50.
Wow.
On the aisle, row M, in the orchestra, late show, and heard them perfectly. I mean, no screams. There were 2 shows that night, and I know that there were plenty of screams at the early show, but by the time the late show happened, they were all home in bed. My bandmate and I had gone down to Penn Station to see their train come in. We never did, but we were there with about 10,000 girls. It was pretty amazing.
Unreal. Yeah, that's when Elvis you were a fan of, but it was the Beatles that really did it for you.
Yeah. Elvis introduced me to rock and roll and the emotion of rock and roll, how it could empower you or do a number of things to you emotionally. But the Beatles, just went so far beyond. And I just ached to be a Beatle. I thought that, being a Beatle is clearly the best thing anybody could possibly be in the world. And at that time, we were just completely consumed.
Now, what's surprising, though, is your career wasn't in the music industry from the get-go. You started in advertising, and your first job is at Gray Advertising. Not fun for you, but a career change wasn't far off. How do you go from working at a drab advertising firm one day to meeting Clive Davis the next?
Yeah, I wrote a letter. The letter is actually reprinted in the book. It was a pretty arrogant letter, I think cheeky, because I ended it with, "I'll call your office to set up an appointment." Instead of, "If you could spare some time, I'd really appreciate being able to come and speak with you," or something like that. But it was like, "I'll call you and we'll make an appointment. I'll come over and talk." But he gave the letter to another guy, and the other guy turned out to be a person who had interviewed me at the business school. And I turned CBS Records down because I thought they were small and because they weren't paying anywhere near what Gray Advertising was paying. And I thought, advertising, cool. But I did not wind up in the creative department. So I was miserable. I was writing marketing plans for Gain Detergent and Jif Peanut Butter. And I was neither proud nor happy about what I was doing. So I interviewed a few people, and finally the head of business affairs said, "I'd like you to talk with Clive." And I said, "Oh boy, I've scored an audience with the Pope. That is it." So he hired me on the spot. And it was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me, really. I went from hell to heaven in a few minutes.
You could evaluate a demo pretty quickly. Yeah. I thought this was fascinating. In fact, you didn't need to go past the third song, half of the first song, minute of the second.
I wasn't absolutely positive that I could identify a hit right away, but I could definitely tell the promising from the dreadful. And most of them were not promising. And so you get a cassette or a reel-to-reel tape, and they'd come from a manager or an agent or an attorney. I would hear something, and if it was reasonably good, I'd listen to it again. If it wasn't really good, you would know it without question, within a minute or two. Then I'd write a personal letter. Everybody else wrote form letters. I got tapes from jail. I got all kinds of tapes, and occasionally one would stand right out. Like Lynyrd Skynyrd's manager came to see me. I didn't know him. He played the demo, and bang, there it was. Freebird was on the demo. And the same thing with Boston. Their manager came in, went to Lenny Pizzi, who was a colleague. Lenny played the tape and came down to my office with the manager and said, "Would you listen to something with me?" And there it was. I mean, it was undeniable. So over the years, you get to sharpen your ear a little bit. And fortunately, I never passed on anything that became huge.
Yeah, you said half of the first song, a minute of the second, and just the first few seconds of the third song. And then you knew by then. The Skynyrd story is fascinating to me because I had Alan Walden on the podcast when he had his book out, and he delivered a great story to you. You were ready, but somebody else said, "I don't hear a song," which is
that was my boss.
Yeah.
My boss said, "Great band, no songs." And that was as we walked out of the Exit Inn in Nashville across the parking lot. And that was the second band he had passed on. Well, the third, actually, after Kiss and Rush.
Yeah, those are the other two. And well, now what's interesting though, Kiss they were actually known as Wicked Lester when you saw them?
When I signed them, they were Wicked Lester. But really, that group had nothing to do with what became Kiss. It was just Paul and Gene, and they were in the group, but they really got fed up with the direction in which the group was going. So they formed a three-piece, and that was the beginning of Kiss.
I've heard the Wicked Lester songs. I don't know how do you describe it. It's more like it's like folk. I don't know how would you describe, but it's nothing like what Kiss would become.
Well, I always described it as very sugary pop music. A lot of harmonies, a lot of background choruses, it was catchy stuff, but it wasn't Kiss.
What did you think when you saw Kiss start to take off?
Well,
remember those
you know,
guys.
the same thing. I said, damn it,
Yeah.
come on. But the thing is that in those days, before Kiss, Rush, and Skynyrd were huge, I was just, I didn't have very much authority or clout or power or influence. I was just a guy who was evaluating tapes. I had signed REO Speedwagon, but that was the only thing that I had signed. And then I was turned down on those three bands until my boss, who turned them down, left and was replaced by a new guy who allowed me to sign Ted Nugent, because he said, well, maybe Werman knows something that we don't. After those three bands became huge. So, yeah, I went into the studio with Ted. I want to stress that we did not discuss politics at that time. And I became a producer by sitting in on the sessions with Ted and the guy who was his official producer, who owned his contract.
Yeah, and I want to ask you a little bit more about your production skills. Gene and Paul, what were they like? They were still very young, I think maybe 20, 21 years old.
Yeah, they were nice kids. Very nice. Gene, always arrogant,
Yes.
always a little sleazy and telling you, what he thinks and what Gene's world is like and why you should be in it. And Paul was quiet. He seemed a little bit shy. And it's funny because he does all the talking on stage now, and Gene doesn't say a word. He was smart. The two of them didn't want to continue in the Wicked Lester direction. And I thought these guys are good, and the whole face paint thing was brand new. And I just liked everything about them. It was really the first time I put myself in the role of music businessman, because I thought, wow, these songs, they're not the greatest songs I ever heard, but very singable in the shower. They've got good hooks that the band drills into your head. So I thought, yeah, we should sign this band.
Well, I think they benefited from Casablanca, because there was the book Kiss at 50. The author Martin Popoff was talking about how Casablanca was important because they didn't have anybody else on the roster, so they were able to really put Kiss right at the top on the priority list.
Yeah, and Neil bought the Wicked Lester album and shelved it. Nobody ever heard it.
So now, what do you think of this? I was watching the clip on YouTube where Paul makes the announcement, this is the end of one road, but the beginning of another. You will see us again. And then they have this preview of an Avatar Kiss show. What do you think about it? Is this something that you'd be interested in seeing?
No.
Can it succeed, I guess, is my question.
Oh, yeah, man. You'll have them in your living room.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll be able, in 20 years, you'll be able to have any band you want, play anything you want right in your living room. Not only that, I mean, you'll be able to have NFL games in your backyard.
Right.
It's something I definitely don't want to see, but it's progress.
Yeah. I mean, do you think they could do something like this and fill an arena? I mean, I can't imagine that.
That I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. But it's kind of like the progression from theater to television. You all had to come together in a large crowd to see a presentation of some kind, and you had to physically go there. And then in time, the same presentation could be presented to you in your living room. Yeah, and you wouldn't have to go anywhere. Well, I think the same thing's going to happen here. Maybe people will go to a stadium just to have the experience and see the band on stage. But there's no reason why you have to sit 100 yards away from the stage. They'll bring it right to you. And they'll be doing things that they never did. And they'll be playing perfectly. And it just won't be the same. It's very much like the music of today, which is perfect and sampled. I was reading something about this Kiss tour, or the last night, I think was Rolling Stone. And they said that Doc, whom I know well, Doc McGee,
Yeah, the manager,
admitted that they did mix in pre-recorded vocals with the real vocals. And I'm not sure what mixed in means, but everybody seems to be okay with that now. Now,
Yeah.
you don't do that. Remember Milli Vanilli?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that whole thing, that was a scandal,
That
because
broke right down the road for me in Bristol, Connecticut. That was
Yeah.
that night at Lake Compounce that
Yeah.
the track skipped
yeah.
right down the road from me. Yeah.
Occasionally in my day, bands would, if they were going to play a song where there was a keyboard, and they didn't have a keyboard in the band, but I brought one in to the studio to put on the record, like, any number of songs, but they'd put the keyboard player off stage and nobody would really notice. And that was okay because it was still live music. They just didn't have the guy on stage. But with all this, recorded stuff, the band might as well just come out and go through the motions, never play or sing.
I think what Paul is doing, if you look, a lot of these people, they just analyze Paul to just the extremes where they've shown video of consecutive shows and they'll note how it sounds exactly the same each night. So it's, from a track, but it also seems like he's kind of weaving in and out of, he's singing live at times, but then he's not. And it looks that way. But then there was a clip I just saw of Eric Singer playing Beth, and he stops, his hands aren't moving and the piano is still going. So that's the danger of being in this era. If you want to try to get away with that, it's not easy because everybody's filming it. Everybody's recording on their phone.
Right. I think it's nowhere near the scandal that it used to be.
Yeah.
Because people see more than one band or act doing it, and they're used to technology. People making records these days look at the music just as much as they listen to it. They take it from the screen and they'll move this chorus over here, or they'll move this to here. And they'll go into auto tune and they'll sample one snare drum. It'll be all the snare drum hits. And no, it's not the same.
No. Tell me more about Rush. What was it that you had a chance to hear? That this was more of a money issue than anybody saying they didn't like the music. What happened with Rush? How much of it did you listen to? A demo of theirs? You got a chance to see them live?
I heard a demo. It was sent to me. I said, I want to see this. So I flew to Toronto, and their manager, Ray Daniels, picked me up, took me to dinner. We drove out to Mississauga, a little suburb of Toronto, and saw them, I think was in a high school gym or a high school theater. And I thought they were wonderful. I thought it was a really great signing because it was art. It wasn't, come on, baby, let's rock all night. It was highbrow rock music, and they were excellent. And I felt really good about the signing. And then they asked for $75,000 advance for a 2-album deal, which is chump change now. Anyway, the guidelines of the business affairs department at CBS, which was a corporation and had stockholders and was responsible to them, the guidelines did not allow for that much money for 2 albums. So they said no. And Cliff Bernstein signed him down at Mercury, a few months later. That was that.
Yeah. This is interesting too, because it wasn't Neil Peart behind the kit. It was John Rutsey on drums.
Right.
Ted Nugent, let's talk about that, because you did feel that same excitement with Ted Nugent. This time you hit a home run. And this is also the moment you go behind the boards and you're credited as co-producer. First, why the decision to produce Ted's 75 self-titled debut? And what were some of the tricks that you did, as you write, to get Ted's aggressive attitude on vinyl? What were some of the things you did?
Well, I didn't become a producer. I didn't try to be a producer. I just went into the studio to protect my investment. I needed to make sure that this was a good one for the label, because I hadn't been able to sign anything successful for 5 years. And, an A&R guy needs to get something going. in order to keep his job. So I went into the studio a lot, and the guy who was producing him he didn't have a rock and roll head. Ted and I got along very well musically. And I think one of the things that really cemented our relationship and told him that he was safe with me in the studio was Stranglehold. It was the first song I ever mixed, and I did some stuff with it. I fiddled around a lot, and I did the backward cymbals and the guitar duets and things like that were manufactured. They weren't just recorded on the spot. And I did that. And I remember he said, I love what you did with Stranglehold, but don't ever do anything like that again without asking me first. So I was delighted. He was really happy with the record. In the book is the postcard he sent saying, thanks, this is great. And you don't get that from Ted that much. It's very difficult for me to explain to my friends, who are all pretty much registered Democrats, that I can still speak to this guy, because he's said some terribly outrageous things. And I don't agree with him at all. But we don't go there. A couple times a year, he'll send me some music, or he'll call me and maybe ask a question, or, he used to send me and my wife bear steaks for Christmas. I never had formed a taste for them, but it was a really nice gesture.
There's some great stuff in the book. You talked about the thank you card from Ted. There's a typewritten memo on Lynyrd Skynyrd, a memo to your boss at Epic Records, leading to your first business trip to see REO Speedwagon live. All this kind of stuff you get in the book, along with the great stories, pictures of you with all these bands and artists you work with. Great stuff.
At Epic, yeah.
Where did you find, were these pictures just somewhere in the attic somewhere, or did you keep good care of them in a photo album?
No, I never considered having a photographer around to document my career. Jimmy Iovine managed to have a video crew in his control room right from the very beginning, when he was just an engineer. I don't know how. I don't know. I mean, he must have had a lot of self-confidence by saying, someday they're going to make a documentary on my life, and I'm going to have all this footage for them. I had to go to the CBS archives, CBS Records archives, and go through years of in-house photographer shots to find ones from the convention, from, backstage at certain shows. And then you'll notice that there are few, or if any, pictures of what I did after I left CBS, because I didn't say, let's bring in a photographer. I want a picture with Twisted Sister. I want a picture with Bret Michaels. Didn't happen. So, I put some entertaining pictures in there.
Well, you got the stories on those bands, and I'll ask you about those. Meatloaf, few people know Meatloaf sang on Ted Nugent's second album, Free for All. He sings 4 tracks.
Right. Yeah, it's right there for them to see, but they don't see it.
Right. How did he get involved with that project? And was he even called me? Because I know if you look now at the credits, it says Meatloaf, but was he even called that at the time?
Yeah.
He was, okay. How did he get involved with this? He's on 4 tracks, which are Street Rats, Together, Hammer Down, and I Love You, So I Told You a Lie.
Love You, So I Told You a Lie. That one is kind of Meatloafy, that title. But I knew Meat because he and Steinman had come in to audition. And he auditioned for me live in my office with Jim Steinman playing the piano. And, he blew the walls down, but I didn't think that we would know how to market him, because he was like a metallic opera.
Yeah, very different.
And so I said, look, I'm not going to sign you, but I introduced him to my boss, not that boss, but the new boss. And when he left CBS, he started Cleveland International Records and signed Meatloaf. And so he was the only one I passed on who became huge, but I passed on him knowing he would become huge, but not on Epic Records. And then Derek, was arrested. It was either for shoplifting or something, but he got in trouble, as he would from time to time, Derek St. Holmes. And so Lou, the guy who owned the contract, Ted's contract, and was the guy in charge. He lost it, and he said, I'm going to teach him a lesson. I don't want him in the studio. Do you know any other singers? I mean, it was kind of a desperate move. And I said, well, I know one really good guy. I don't know if he's right for the part. Call him. So I called Meat, and he came down from New York to Atlanta the next day. He did the 4 songs, and he went home.
It's only because now, after all these years, we know Meatloaf's voice that you can listen to it and say, oh, okay. But it's not like it's instantly identifiable. Was he trying to sing in the style of Derek? Was he?
I don't think so. No. He just sang. It was pretty good that he could actually learn those songs that he had never heard and the lyrics and make it sound convincing. Nobody ever asked me about that really until I started doing interviews. And then people said, Meatloaf.
The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this. Tom Werman's our guest. The book is called Turn It Up, My Time Making Hit Records in the Glory Days of Rock Music, featuring Mötley Crüe, Poison, Twisted Sister, Jeff Beck, Ted Nugent, Cheap Trick, and more. You say you loved the sessions for the 3 albums you did with Cheap Trick, and 3 legendary albums. You produced 77's In Color, 78's Heaven Tonight, and 79's Dream Police. Now, you have nothing but great things to say about these guys in the band, and you think you may have been the one who came up with the term for Robin Zander, which is the man of 1,000 voices?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I love Robin. I mean, as I said, this band and all the members in it were a producer's dream. Made it so easy to make really good records. And those are the ones I listen to today. If I listen to anything I did, it will be one of those. I have only one song on a 4-hour playlist on my phone that I use at the gym, and that's Auf Wiedersehen. I just think it rocks hard. It was a gift. It was so easy to work with them.
You said Robin just owned it whenever he took on the vocals. And he still sounds great. Still sounds phenomenal.
Apparently, I haven't seen them in a long time, because Rick and I had a major disagreement about I Want You to Want Me. I mean, his story is that after they left the studio and went on tour or something, I put the tack piano on the studio version of I Want You to Want Me. And I said, my recollection was, you were sitting on the couch when we did that piano part. And, you being Rick. And I remember when I turned to them and said, what about this? What do you like this? And Rick said, you're the producer. So I figured, well, hey, I can do stuff here. So he was complaining about the song, which they completely changed. Obviously, but I treated it as a dance hall song, which it was. I snapped fingers on that song. You don't snap fingers if you don't put finger snaps on a Zeppelin song. So then they changed it completely, which was good. It was good. It worked, But I don't have any contact with them. I have contact with Bunny, but I have no contact with Robin or Tom or Rick. And I was not close with Rick, but I knew his family. And as I said, our kids trick-or-treated together one time in LA, and he was over at the house, and my wife was there, and my wife knew his wife, and so on. Anyway, I'll never see him again. And I haven't seen him for like 40 years. It's a shame. Shame.
Yeah, because it sounds like you're so proud of those 3 records, which you should be.
I am. And then, you've got things like Roger Waters and David Gilmour, or Ray Davies and Dave Davies, they won't speak to each other. Think of how a Kinks reunion tour would do. And then you've got Mick Mars and the rest of the band. And it's a tough business for personalities.
A lot of times it's creative differences, but also it can be, as a band gets bigger and bigger, there's the egos. There's also people on the outside saying you don't need them. You can be a solo artist. A lot of that happens.
That almost happened with Peterson, with Tom Peterson and and Dagmar. She wanted him to sing. She wanted him to be bigger in the band, and he did sing one song.
And he left the band for one album, right?
I
believe.
Yeah, I think so.
There's a fascinating process that you had on most of the projects you were involved with as a producer, and you get into detail in the book, selecting the songs, followed by pre-production, then load in and set up, the all-important recording engineer, laying it down, mixing, and last, mastering and delivery. Just pick out a small portion of that entry. You say that once you had a good drum performance and the song's foundation was solid, you'd start building the songs like a pyramid. Can you expand on that a little bit, and how it would avoid you having to, quote, fix it in the mix?
Well, you wouldn't, if you could do one instrument at a time, you could make it flawless, pretty perfect and mistake-free, because you could go in and correct that track and punch in and go into record and then out of record to fix whatever mistakes the player had made. So you've got a great drum track, then you've got a great bass track, then you've got, everything is solid all the way up to the top. If you did the whole band live, everybody would have clams. There would be mistakes in every instrument all throughout the song, really. It's not live, but I don't know if you saw the part about all the bands who never were in the studio before wanted to record live and assumed they would. So we just set them up in the studio and get all their sounds together. And they thought, all right, let's go in and play these songs, which, one of the things that really surprised me was in the Peter Jackson Beatles documentary, they did play live. And that was, wow.
Yeah.
That was amazing. I mean, they were so tight. But yeah, that's the way I would do it. And it became pretty neat, pretty tight recording, which is something that the grunge bands completely rejected. I understand why. What we did was corporate rock. Fortunately, a lot of people liked it and still do.
That's the thing that's interesting with Mötley Crüe, the albums that you produced for them. 83's Shout at the Devil, 85's Theater of Pain, 87's Girls, Girls, Girls. To me, I love that sound. And to your credit, I mean, you're talking about they were hard on the drugs during this period. I guess my question is, did you have to work hard to keep them focused? Or are the stories that we read and hear exaggerated?
There aren't really any wild stories from the studio. It all happened outside the studio. They were pretty focused. I mean, they weren't like some of the bands that I did work with who were much more focused, but they weren't wild. They weren't irresponsible. They worked, because when we turned them out. Theater of Pain suffered, as many second albums do, after the first big hit. So Shout at the Devil was really big. They hustled back into the studio. The songs that they did on Shout had been around for a long time. They'd been playing them for a long time. They go out on the road. The album goes nuts. They book another tour for them that's big, and they're opening for Aerosmith. They're opening for Kiss. They're, whatever. And they have to come up with 12 songs within 3 months and record an album and get ready for the next tour. And there's a lot of stress involved in that whole process. And stress brings about self-medication. And there you go. So thank God for Home Sweet Home.
I was just about to ask. Yeah, tell me about that. So Tommy Lee brought that song?
He just came in and started to play that riff on the piano. And the song came together quite easily. It was kind of like John Lennon playing the piano on Imagine. Of course it was not like that, but it was a very natural song to record. I think everybody will agree that the material on Theater wasn't necessarily as good as the material on Girls, Girls, Girls and Shout. Girls, Girls, Girls had that song, Girls, 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 and it had Wild Side.
One of the best from the Crüe.
I think Wild Side is probably the best thing I did with that band. It's just a slam bang.
Oh, man. And that tail end when you hear the actuality sounds, or however you want to call it, but
gunshots, sirens.
Those actual recordings. I mean, did you go out on the street and record them?
Yeah, we had, one of the girls who worked at the studio did the scream. one of the guys who worked at the studio was the barker at the door who said, "Come on, check it out for free." We didn't go to Times Square. Some of the sounds were live. Some of the sounds were from maybe sound effects tapes or something. But I don't recall exactly how we pieced it together, but it was fun.
Tommy Lee is just a phenomenal drummer. I know his image is that of the wild man. A lot of times people don't really think about him as a musician enough, in my opinion.
Well, he and Bunny, those were the two best. And yeah, I mean, Tommy was a wonderful timekeeper, and he had his own style, the four on the floor thing. Bunny, on the other hand, was really good for what he didn't play. And he was kind of a Charlie Watts guy. Very simple, very small kit, but nailed it down, really nailed it down. And Tommy was just a dynamo. He was the most enthusiastic musician I've ever worked with. I mean, raring to go all the time, really agreeable, excited about technology, wanted to do stuff always. Yeah, he was great. He liked sampling. He did, there was some sampling on Wild Side. Tommy and Mick were both extremely cooperative, very responsible, and highly underrated.
Kind of bummed to see Mick not in Mötley Crüe. John Five's a great guitarist, but it's hard to see Mötley Crüe without Mick Mars up there.
Yeah, he's the man.
Poison's Every Rose Has Its Thorn. Only #1 single that you've produced, according to the book.
That is true.
4 top 10 singles from Open Up and Say Ah. This is from 1988. You produced this album.
Yeah.
You're among the first, if not the first, to hear Every Rose Has Its Thorn.
Yeah, the first.
So he wrote this one at a laundromat. I remember he told the story. And the girl cheated on him, and he came up with this song. See, to me, Bret Michaels is a solid songwriter. I think the song, I mean, and you've talked about in the book, hey, not the most skilled musicians you've ever worked with, but they work hard. But I think the songs are solid.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, Poison is a legitimate, they're a legitimate band, a legitimate act, and good guys. And they were the ones who were really, they were able to party hard and work hard. They were never irresponsible. CeCe sometimes took it a little too far, in those days, but they did the work. They did the work that was necessary.
What was the Ricky Rocket story you talked about with the drum fill? You worked him hard, and he just said, whatever you need.
He had a lot of trouble doing this. I can't remember why it was so important, but it was a drum fill or a turnaround between the chorus and the next verse or going into the chorus, and he just couldn't hack it. And it was important enough for me to call Bunny Carlos and ask if he would come down to the studio, because he was in town in LA, and help Ricky to get it. And he did. And Ricky, he worked probably 2 or 3 hours on this one fill. Anyway, it's on there, and don't ask me which one it was. I don't remember.
Remember the controversial album cover with the girl with the tongue. Yeah. And they had the mothers against.
Oh, something. Yeah, PMRC.
Yeah.
The Parental Music Resource Committee. Man, we had fun with them. Yeah.
You were just quickly going back to the crew. So they hired Bob Rock. They didn't tell you. You just found out they're working with Bob Rock now. Okay.
Yeah. Doc said we're going to use another producer. That was okay. A producer's not going to take a completely different route or have a completely different production approach. It's the same guy. I used certain things on every record because they worked. And it didn't mean that somebody said, oh yeah, Tom Werman produced that. It sounds just like that. That's not how it worked. But, Jimmy Iovine said, after 3 albums, you should shoot your producer, which is funny, but kind of true. I did 5 with Ted. I did 5 with Molly Hatchett. I did 3 with Cheap Trick, 3 with Mötley Crüe. And it's time. It was time for me to leave with Ted and Molly Hatchett.
Molly Hatchett, I should ask you about them too. 5 albums. That was a underrated band, I guess you could say, in the sense that there's like one song, Flirting with Disaster, but there's much more to them than that song. But Flirting with Disaster is a classic.
Yeah, Dreams is
Yes. I thought that was cool because the Allman Brothers version is just called Dreams, and then Molly Hatchett calls it Dreams I'll Never See. That was a great cover.
it really was, and it wound up, and the last minute with the alternating solos was really, it's really good. You know, the guys, they're all dead. It's a shame.
I know.
And they were considerably younger than I was. We had fun. They were good too. I mean, I really I got along so well with them, and we were from different worlds, really.
When did you first see them play?
Well, I was remixing a Cheap Trick song in a studio in Atlanta, which we used a lot. And their manager called me and said, "We'll come up. We'll set up in the studio and play for you." And I said, "Well, that's pretty convenient. I'd love to do that. Don't even have to leave the building to audition this band." So they did. And we got a great sound on them. I mean, here we are in a recording studio control room, and they played a set, and it was brilliant. Right there, bang, that was it. So I said, "I'd love to sign you guys." And I remember Dave Lubeck, who was basically the leader of the band, said, "Mr. Werman, all I want is my front tooth back."
I love that story.
He was missing. I mean, he looked like, you know, Joey Hee Haw. He had no front tooth. Anyway, they were good guys. In terms of underrated, Dwayne Rowland, who was the best guitar player in that band, he was silly. He was so good. I mean, you can hear him. I can hear him every time he plays. There are three of them playing, you know, and they take turns, and I had to give them equal time, but I would have been very happy if Dwayne had done all the guitars on all the songs. Guy was amazing. Never looked at his neck. Never looked at his neck. Doubled everything he played perfectly. And he was a one-take guy. I mean, he was beyond session guys in terms of his capability. There's one song that we covered that the Stones did, "It's All Over Now." And he does a solo in there that Keith played or tried to play. I mean, Keith, you know, look, Keith is magnificent, but the solo that he plays was not what you hear when Dwayne plays it. Dwayne nailed it totally. And if you hear Keith play it and then you listen to Dwayne play it, you can see the difference between, you know, a fine technician and a guy who goes on feel. And that you know, that would be Keith. I'm not saying anything bad about Keith Richards here. You know, he came up with the greatest riffs in rock and roll. But you know, he's not a technician like Joe Walsh or Rick Derringer or John Mayer, or, you know.
Yeah, "It's All Over Now" was a single too. That was off of Flirting with Disaster.
Was it a single? I didn't remember that.
Well, according to what I'm looking at here, it was released in '79 as a single. But Flirting with Disaster, like, did you, once that's done and you're like, yeah, this is going to be huge? Or, I mean, I always ask that of producers and musicians, like, these hit songs, do they know when it's done, like, oh yeah, this is going to be it?
Yes, with some of them, yes. I knew it with Every Rose. I knew it with Cat Scratch Fever and Surrender, but not too many others, you know. I wasn't a believer in We're Not Going to Take It.
Really?
You know, I wasn't wild about the song. Dee says I wouldn't let them do it. Complete fiction. They did it. Yeah. I didn't love it. We made it as good as we could. Same thing with I Wanna Rock. I thought they sounded a little bit like nursery rhymes. And maybe that's what, you know, made them so singable.
I think that's the first album I ever owned, because I think I got it for Christmas as a kid. My older brother got it with D with the big bone in his hand. Yeah, and then who was the? I talked to the photographer,
Mark Weiss.
Yes, you're right, Mark Weiss, and he said it was funny because he went to their place there in New York, and you know, they were crazy. You know, they were blasting the music. You know, and the neighbors were complaining about the music being too loud, and so on and so forth. And then he went in there, and they did the shots, but anyway. Yeah. But yeah, well, what a career. Now tell me how and when you end up becoming an award-winning innkeeper. Tell about this. I need to get this book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Cheese.
I think, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I was stuck. I read the book in one sitting, and it really got me just off my ass. And 2 weeks later, I was out here in the Berkshires looking for a place. I figured I needed to reinvent myself. I was not happy with my career at the time, and I knew none of these bands from Seattle were going to work with the guy who produced Mötley Crüe. That would be an embarrassment. Mötley Crüe was really cool, and then they were embarrassment, and now they're really cool. And that's why classic rock is so great. We have an appreciation now for what was then. I knew that I wasn't useful to any of the bands from Seattle or any of the grunge bands, and I didn't particularly think it was appropriate for a 55-year-old to be making records for teenagers at that point. And I knew my music was gone. It was gone, and that was kind of this end of the classic rock era for me. And so I found our place in February, and we were living there in July. It was that quick. We moved back from LA, and it took us a year to renovate and to open up. And Linda Ronstadt was our first guest, because she was playing at Tanglewood, which was 3/4 of a mile down the road. But yeah, I had to reinvent myself. I wasn't ready to retire, and I wanted to live in the country. And we had been here once before, my wife and I. And this was a most stunning place. So I got this idea for the luxury bed and breakfast concept, which is an oxymoron, because bed and breakfasts were typically charming and Spartan. You didn't have anything. You were lucky if you had a radio in your room, and you had a room, not a suite. So I had suites, 3 suites and 2 outbuildings. So 5 units, and they were all as well equipped as they could possibly be. Big screen TVs, internet, Bose wave radios, which were really hot then, landlines, and all sorts of luxuries. And I made a killer breakfast. So eventually, the travel people started coming, and we had celebrities come there, and very quiet. They knew that they could trust us. We didn't talk about them. And we got awards.
Wow. When did you open it up? What year?
2001. We started in July with Linda, and then we sold. 2001, and we sold it in 2021. Wow. So that was it. We moved up the street because we love the street so much. It's a mile from here.
So life is good, man. That's great. That's the what they call the second act.
Oh yeah, I've been so lucky. I've had 2 fabulous careers. And the retirement thing is really good too.
Is it? Nice. Yes. Very nice. Yeah. And then this book all came about because of something you read online, and then you started writing a blog, and then the blog leads to the book.
Yeah. You remember a lot from the book. That's very nice.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yeah. So the book I'm sure the book is doing very well. It's been out, I think it came out last month.
November 21st. It's only been out like 3 weeks at best, 2.5. Yeah, it seems to be well received, and people all say 2 things about it. One, I just couldn't put it down. I finished it in 2 days, and they all call it an easy read. So I'm lucky, because I only have one writing style, and that was it. So fortunately, it works for readers. I don't think too many people out there who are serious readers or writers thought that the guy who produced Mötley Crüe could actually write a sentence. So I'm glad that it's doing well.
And sure enough, you can. And it's out now. It is out now through Jawbone Press. That's the publisher.
Right.
So yeah, people can get Turn It Up, my time-making hit records in the glory days of rock music, featuring Mötley Crüe, Poison, Twisted Sister, Jeff Beck, Ted Nugent, Cheap Trick, and more. Many more, we'll add. And it's out now. And where can people find you online?
Well, I have TomWerman.com, but I'm not an online guy, really. If you Google me, there's all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff, pages and pages, and old interviews and new interviews, and anyway, articles. But I'm not a tech savvy guy. I've been doing some book promotion on Instagram, and occasionally I'll go on Facebook, and talk to people. And I have about 3,000 Facebook friends, but I like paper and pencil. I still have a landline. I'm out of the traffic.
You don't need all this craziness with the social media and all that stuff. Tom, thanks so much. This was so fun. I couldn't wait to talk to you. And there's so much more I could ask you, but we'll leave that for the book. People can read the book to get more stories.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
That's it. It's in the books.